Welcome to your College Ready Taster session for Criminology and Law. In this presentation you will find some more details about your study programme and get a feel for the sort of topics we'll be covering and how you'll be taught throughout the time at college. With criminology there are two types of assessment. The first assessment is a controlled assessment lasting 8 hours, and you will be taught this up until Christmas. The 8 hours is spread out between Christmas and in the new year. You'll get 1 hour slots, 2 hour slots for you to do the assessment, and this is all prepared in lesson. You'll have some homeworks to do. You will take a file into the controlled assessment with all your prepared materials. For the second part of the assessment, it will be an exam, and this will be for an hour and a half, and you'll be taught that information from the January through till the June next year. For the controlled assessment, the topics we will look at are types of crime. We'll look at the types of victims, the typical perpetrators, statistics of crime and the evaluation of this, media representation of crime, looking at different campaigns and the impact of these campaigns on policy and law change. Now, for the controlled assessment, you will have homeworks to do to prepare for this, and you will have timed assessments in class. For the controlled assessment, you will be able to take your file into the controlled assessment. You will be given a brief, and within that brief you will have to identify the type of crime in that brief. And you will also have to design a campaign for the type of crime you've chosen. For the exam, the topics we'll cover are crime and deviance, social construction of crime, different theories of crime including biological, individualistic and sociological, and we will also look at the evaluation of each of those and how well they explain criminal behaviour, situations of criminality, social changes and the development of policies. The teaching of this course, you will get lots of homework, lots of classwork to do, timed assessments, and we'll look at lots of different campaigns which have happened and lots of case studies, so we'll be watching lots of videos in class and assessing those videos and seeing and linking it to the theory that we've discussed. For this presentation, we're going to look at types of crime, which will be the first topic that we start to look at in September. The first type of crime we'll look at is white-collar crime. Now, these are committed in commercial situations for financial gain. The victims and offenders, we have corporate crime, professional crime. Victims are consumers, taxpayers and the government, employees and the public at large. It's also linked to organised crime. So a good example of this is the mafia, for example. The types of white-collar crime that we'll be looking at, and we'll be looking at different examples of these and case studies. When people are given money in return for breaking rules when they're in a position of trust. The illegal practice of making money using private information about companies' stocks and shares. When money is gained by telling lies or giving false information. And when workers steal from their employer and covering it up so that their employer is unaware. There are three types of white-collar crime. The first one is organised, and this is similar to the mafia, where it's an organised criminal organisation. The second one is corporate, and this is where it's on behalf of a company. And the final one is professional, where it's committed by professionals such as accountants stealing their clients' funds. Then we have state crimes, which are illegal or deviant activities perpetrated by state agencies. These can also include crimes by other individuals or groups when carried out with the backing of the state. State crimes include human rights abuses such as genocide, the extermination of entire national, ethnic, racial or religious groups, for example, the Holocaust, where the Nazi state sought to kill all Jews and Gypsies in the countries they controlled during the Second World War. Now, this is a case study that you can look into for some background reading for September. The victims may be citizens of the state in question or of another state. Offenders are state officials such as politicians, civil servants, police officers and security forces. The level of public awareness for state crimes is often huge, as people are aware of what is happening. State crimes include genocide, as we've talked about the Holocaust. You can also look into Rwanda in 1994. War crimes, indiscriminate bombing of civilian population. Torture to extract confessions or information from prisoners. And imprisonment without trial of political opponents. You can also look at police brutality assaulting peaceful protesters. The next type of crime is moral crimes, and these are acts that go against society's norms and moral code, its accepted values and rules of behaviour. Examples of this are prostitution, selling drugs, begging, underage drinking, cigarette smoking underage. And a lot of people do some of these acts, like underage drinking and cigarette smoking underage, but it does go against the morals of society. But sometimes they're ignored and they're not acknowledged because it is quite common in society that people do underage drink. I know in class sometimes when I've asked the students how many people have had an alcoholic drink under the age of 18, there are some hands that go up. So it is quite a common thing to happen. Then we have technological crime. So have a think about what is a technological crime. I know a lot of people don't realise that they have been a victim of technological crime just because sometimes you don't always understand it. Sometimes it's referred to as cybercrime, and it can be on social media. Financial crimes like phishing, frauds, cyber trespass, hacking social media accounts. I know one of my friends has had her Instagram account hacked, so she can't get back into it. Identity theft, illegal downloading of material, and then more serious technological crimes like publishing or viewing child pornography. Recently my Netflix account was hacked into and I had to contact Netflix and sort that out so that I could get my password back. But things like this happen all the time to us in our everyday lives, and a lot of the time people are unaware that they've been a victim of it. It's not reported to the police always necessarily because sometimes it's quite easily sorted. Then we have individual crime, and this is where a hate crime is where a perpetrator is perceived to be motivated by hatred of the victim because of the victim's disability, race, religion, sexual orientation, or transgender identity. These characteristics are known as protected characteristics. The person perceiving the offender to be motivated by hatred doesn't need to be the victim, it can be the witness, police, or anyone else. And within this crime, we also look at a case study of Matthew Shepherd, which you might want to have a research on. And we look at the fact that he was gay and he was attacked and the implications of that being a hate crime. You've got a question there, can a regular crime also be a hate crime? Yes, it can. Because if an assault is religiously aggravated, the maximum sentence can rise from 6 months to 2 years. So the fact that it's a hate crime can be quite serious with regards to the sentencing. case study that we look at for honour killings is the case study of Shafilia Ahmed. Now, she was a 17-year-old British Pakistani girl from Warrington, and she was murdered by her parents in a suspected so-called honour killing in September 2003. And this was because the parents deemed her behaviour to be too westernised, and they wanted her to marry someone from Pakistan. She refused. She wanted to go to university and have a career, and they saw that as bringing shame on the family. Again, this is another case study that you could research in preparation for September. Another crime we look at is individual crime, domestic abuse. So I know a lot of you will be thinking that, about domestic abuse and what it is. Mainly it's physical and sexual assaults and rape, financial abuse, controlling victims' money or running up debts in their name, emotional or psychological abuse, controlling behaviour designed to make the victim subordinate or dependent, isolating them, controlling the daily life, exploiting them financially, or preventing them from escaping the relationship. Coercive behaviour involving emotional abuse to harm, punish, or frighten the victim. Now, a study that we look at for this is Clare's Law. So that's another one for you to have a research for September. And it gives women the right to ask the police to check whether their partner has a violent past. It's named after Clare Wood, who was murdered in 2009 by her ex-boyfriend, who had an undisclosed history of violence. So again, this is one of the campaigns that we'll be looking at, Clare's Law, and how that impacted the law, and that now we can ask for the police for names of anyone who has a violent past if we have any concerns. When you think of domestic abuse, people usually think that it's women, and typically it is women in romantic relationships. However, this isn't only the people who experience domestic violence. The most common people are women aged 16 to 24, separated and divorced, lone parents, people with a disability, and women in the lowest income bracket. However, males can also be a victim of domestic violence, and we watch quite an interesting and horrific programme on a young man who was controlled by his girlfriend and attacked by his girlfriend, and she stopped his family from seeing him as well. Very coercive behaviour towards him. So you can see the contrast between the fact that males do still suffer from domestic violence. Thank you for listening to me today. I hope you've enjoyed the presentation. We do have an interesting course for you to take here. We do look at lots of interesting case studies. We look at different campaigns, different policies. We consider the media a lot. So there's lots of watching clips and videos in class, lots of nice discussions. And I hope to see you all in September. And now on to Tracy and law.
Thank you very much for that introduction to criminology, Helen. Hello everybody, my name is Tracy and I'm going to be doing an introduction to A-level law with you today. First thing I want to do is give you a quick idea of what the course entails. So it is a 2-year course and you will receive a qualification at the end of the 2 years. And it is a 100% exam, which means that at the end of the 2 years you'll be examined on everything that you have learnt over those 2 years, and there is no coursework element. There are 3 papers that we will be looking at, and each paper is set out in the same way, starting off with multiple choice, but leading up to 2 30-mark questions. As I said, there are 3 papers, and each one has a different focus. Firstly, it's paper 1, which is crime. We look at what makes a crime, but also we look at specific crimes in particular. And the crimes that we do look at are called non-fatal offences, fatal offences, and property offences. In paper 2, we look at tort, which is things like negligence. Have you had an accident in the last 3 years? Can you claim if you are involved in an accident? Also, other types of tort, such as nuisance. So if your neighbour is playing music till 3 o'clock in the morning, what can you do about it? And then finally, we look at paper 3. We'll be looking at contract. How do we form a contract? Does a contract have to be written, or can it be verbal? Also, what happens if somebody breaches a contract, if they break that contract and don't fulfill their obligations? So those are the 3 topics that we'll be looking at over the 2 years. So how will you learn while studying A-level law? Firstly, the most obvious, we will be doing some classwork where we work as a whole group, working through our worksheets. However, this isn't the predominant way that we learn. A large amount of our work is in group work. This can be anything from working in pairs for a quick 5 minutes, up to working as a larger group for around 20 minutes to produce a 5-minute presentation for the rest of the class. We will be looking at different styles of quizzes, including the likes of Kahoot, and we'll be looking at scenario questions. Scenario questions are quite unique for law, and we will be looking at those later on today. You will be expected to submit homework on a weekly basis. This can be anything from research up to producing full essay answers. And you will be having in-class assessments where you produce exam-style answers in exam conditions. So, as you've looked at criminology today, I thought with our little focus on law, we'd stick with crime. So we stuck with a subject from paper 1, which I think is very interesting, which is sentencing. So the first thing I want you to do is think about this question. What type of sentences do we have in England and Wales? So if somebody is found guilty by a jury, what sentences can the judge give to that person? So I'm going to give you a few minutes to think about that. So I hope you got some ideas down there. So let's have a look at what I've got. The first one is prison. There are a number of different types of prison sentences. So for example, for our most serious offence, murder, there is a mandatory life sentence. This means that they are sent to prison for a period with a minimum what's called tariff. So you might be sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 15 years. After those 15 years, if the probation service agree, you could be released. However, you are still on licence for the rest of your life, hence why it's called a life sentence. The other type of prison sentence is a fixed term sentence. This means that you will go to prison for a fixed amount of years. So, for example, for theft, I might be given a sentence of 3 years. However, the likelihood is that you will be released after 50% of your sentence. So the next sentence is a fine. So this is where the defendant has to pay a set amount of money, and that money goes to the state, so to the government. Another is a community order. This used to be known as community service, but now the community order includes a lot more than just unpaid work. You might be asked to go on probation, you might be asked to go to a rehabilitation course such as Alcoholics Anonymous, or you could be asked to submit to a curfew. There is also a suspended sentence. These are used quite rarely, and these are for where people are in certain circumstances where really the seriousness of the crime means that you should go to prison, but their personal circumstances mean that actually we're going to suspend that sentence until for a set amount of time, for example 2 years, and as long as they don't reoffend within that time, they will not have to serve that sentence. This is quite similar to our last sentence, which is a conditional discharge. So a conditional discharge is where somebody is just allowed to leave the court with no sentence whatsoever, and as long as they don't reoffend within a set time, again, for example, 2 years, they will not have to serve any sentence. The difference between this and a suspended sentence is, if they do reoffend, they will have to go back to court and they will be given a new sentence. Whereas a suspended sentence, they will just serve the original sentence that they were given. How many of these did you get? Were these all known to you? So start thinking about these kind of things. So now that we know the types of sentences, what we need to consider now is what do the courts think about when they are giving these sentences out? How do they decide which sentence is most suitable? And for that, we look at what is the aim of these sentences? What is the purpose of them? So I want you to think about, why are each of those sentences given? What is the reason for them? So I hope you had some time to think there. So let's have a look at the actual aims that the Criminal Justice Act 2003 sets out. First of all, there's retribution, and this is purely that the defendant is punished for what they did, and that the victim's family or the victim themselves get justice. Secondly, is that some sentences are used as a deterrent. So there are two types: an individual deterrent, where an individual is given a longer sentence to try and stop them from doing it again, or there can be a general deterrent, where again an individual is given a longer sentence, but this time it is to try and stop other people from committing that same offence. Next would be reparation. This is where the defendant has to pay back to the victim. This can be monetary, as in compensation, or it can be through work. So for a good example would be if somebody commits criminal damage by damaging a garden, they may be asked to repair the damage that they have caused. Next is rehabilitation. This is where the defendant will go through some kind of course to try and improve them as a person to stop them from reoffending. Good examples would be the community order that we discussed before, where somebody could be sent on alcohol or drug rehabilitation, which will stop them from reoffending in the future. And then finally is incapacitation. This is for the most serious and violent of offenders, and this will ensure that the sentence protects the public. So prison is a perfect example of this. Some people are given very, very long sentences purely to protect the public, to stop them from physically reoffending. So we've looked at the types of sentences and we've looked at the aims of sentences. The final thing that we need to look at is, what do the courts consider when deciding on the actual sentence that is given? So what factors are given? So there's two types of factors that we look at. There are aggravating factors and there are mitigating factors. Just a quick 10 seconds, think in your head, what do you think these mean? Aggravating factors are factors that will increase a sentence, and therefore mitigating factors are factors that will decrease a sentence. So try and think to yourselves, what kind of things about the crime or about the defendant themselves would increase a sentence and make it more serious, and also what kind of things would decrease a sentence and make it less serious. So this is not an exhaustive list, so there are other factors that could be considered, especially there are aggravating factors that are specific to a particular crime. So for example, a burglary charge, a sentence will be more serious if that is committed at night with a family in the house than if it was committed during the day in an empty house. General aggravating factors would be if the defendant already has a criminal record, if their act is premeditated, i.e. they planned it, if it is part of gang activity, if they have serious injuries or losses. So the more serious a theft is, the higher the sentence will be. If it's a vulnerable victim, so this can be through age, through disability, or through race or gender, a not guilty plea. So if they plead not guilty, they are then putting the victim or the victim's family through re-experiencing the crime through a trial. And if alcohol or drugs are involved, the courts will look very harshly on somebody who is under the influence of alcohol or drugs. So mitigating factors. If the defendant has no previous record, if they committed it on impulse, i.e. it wasn't planned, if it was minor injuries or losses, if they were provoked, if the victim did something to push them into committing that crime. The age and health of the defendant could be a mitigating factor, whether it be that they are very young and the courts are very hesitant to put youth in prison, or if they're very elderly. Also, the most common mitigating factor is a guilty plea, where you can receive up to a third off the sentence for pleading guilty. So those are the aggravating factors and mitigating factors, but as I said, that's not an exhaustive list. So what we're going to do now is look at a number of different scenarios. So first of all, we're going to look at Frank. So Frank, aged 27 and unemployed, is guilty to assaulting another homeless person who had taken Frank's usual sleeping space in a shop doorway. Frank has numerous convictions for minor offences, but has recently stopped drinking and has been offered a place in a hostel. So what I want you to go through is go through the scenario and try and pick out what aggravating and mitigating factors are there when sentencing Frank. Also, considering that assault has a maximum of 6 months in prison with a minimum of a conditional discharge, and people can be fined or they can have a community order. Consider what do you think would be the best sentence for Frank and what aims would you use? So let's have a look what I've put as the aggravating and mitigating factors. So the fact that Frank has pleaded guilty will definitely go in his favour. The fact that he is a homeless person, he's actually quite vulnerable, and therefore the courts will take this into consideration. The fact that he was provoked, somebody had taken his usual sleeping space, this doesn't justify his crime, but it does explain why he did it. The fact that he's got numerous convictions could possibly be relevant. However, then the fact that for minor offences that don't seem to be related, we don't necessarily need to consider these. And one of the biggest mitigating factors is the fact that he's recently stopped drinking and he has been offered a place in a hostel. So, what kind of sentence did you give? I personally would give Frank a community order. I think a conditional discharge is unsuitable because of his situation, but we could give him a community order where he would be required to live at the hostel and he would be under curfew at that hostel, and that he continue to go through rehabilitation for his drinking. So that's Frank. And the purposes of that order would be mainly rehabilitation to try and stop him from offending again by improving his life. As I said, the numerous convictions are only really relevant if they were related, which they aren't in this scenario. So let's have a look at Brian. Brian's 28 and single, and he's been convicted of grievous bodily harm. He is identified as a member of a racist gang which attacked a black youth for no apparent reason, causing him 2 broken ribs and a ruptured spleen. Brian has 5 previous convictions for assault, causing actual bodily harm in similar circumstances, for which he has served 2 short prison terms. So just to give you an idea, here he would be charged with Section 18, grievous bodily harm, with a maximum sentence of life in prison. So again, consider what aggravating and mitigating factors there are, and what sentence would you give Brian and why? So looking at Brian, what kind of factors are there? The fact that it's grievous bodily harm, this is a very serious offence, and he's caused very serious injuries, in particular the ruptured spleen. He's a member of a racist gang who has attacked a black youth, so therefore, if you refer back to Helen's criminology talk, this is a hate crime, and therefore the sentence will be increased. There was no provocation, there was no reason for him to attack this young man. Also, he has previous convictions for assaults in similar circumstances. And actually, what he has done is he's progressed here. Previously, he's committed actual bodily harm, which is some harm. He's now caused serious harm. So actually, he seems to be getting worse. And importantly, his 2 short prison terms didn't actually help in any way. So I think Brian would definitely receive a prison sentence, and I think it would be quite a lengthy prison sentence, potentially 10 years, because it is a racist attack, but also I think it would be as a deterrent, because his previous short prison terms has had no effect, and therefore he needs to be given some kind of deterrent. And also, I think it is protection of the public. People need protecting from Brian because of his racist views. Final scenario is Tom. Tom's a trainee solicitor, aged 24, and he pleads guilty to unlawfully wounding another rugby player by biting his ear in the scrum, completely removing a small piece of it. Tom is regarded by his employers as a very talented and dedicated young man. He has no previous convictions and spends 6 hours every Saturday working voluntarily at a local shelter for homeless people. So once again, take a few seconds to think about what aggravating and mitigating factors. Just to let you know, this would be wounding, section 20, with a maximum sentence of 5 years, but you can also receive community orders, discharge and fines. So what have we got here? Well, the fact that Tom is a trainee solicitor, so therefore he's got quite an important job, and he's still in his training period. He's pleaded guilty, which means that he would receive a big reduction in his sentence. And it wasn't a pre-planned event. It was part of a sporting activity, and he's just taken it too far. He's regarded by his employers as being very, very talented and dedicated young man. He's got no previous convictions. It seems out of character. And the most important one is he spends 6 hours every Saturday working voluntarily at a local shelter for homeless people. What aggravating factors are there? Well, the fact that he's permanently injured this other rugby player by removing a small piece of the ear is quite serious. I think, taking all of these into account, that because it's a serious offence, wounding, that he should receive a prison sentence. However, take into account the fact that he's a trainee solicitor, he's a very dedicated young man, and he spends so much time voluntarily working with the homeless, that sentence should be suspended for a period of 2 years. So, what now? If you do want any more information about either of the courses we've been talking about today, please feel free to have a look at the website for the exam boards. So for A-Level Law, if you go to the AQA exam board website and look at the specification 7162, please make sure you look at this one, as this is the full A-Level, whereas 7161 is the AS. you're interested in criminology, please Google the WJC Level 3 Certificate in Applied Criminology, where you should find the full specification. Thanks for watching this introduction to law and criminology today. We hope you've enjoyed the session and that it's given you a good idea of your study programme starting in this September. Don't forget to visit the other sections of your College Ready programme on the website, including the transition sheets. There's one for A-level law and there's also one for applied criminology. It will also help you prepare for a great start to your life at Trafford College when you join us after the summer. So, have a nice summer. Please make sure that you do try and read around the subjects. You might consider downloading the BBC News app and keeping up to date with all news, as this is something we discuss often in class. So good luck, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.